first started getting into photography, I couldn't afford to buy my own SLR camera, so I borrowed my brother's brand new SLR. He was incredibly proud of his camera and he told me that it was the top of the line and to be really careful with it and the Sigma lens that went with it. I didn't know much about cameras, and so as far as I was concerned, I was using the best camera and lens combo on the market. I happily used that lens and camera for the next 2 years, shooting many of my first paid gigs doing models and actors' headshots. It wasn't until I tried to trade the camera and lens in for some new gear that the guy in the camera store told me that my gear was actually worthless and suggested that I take them home and use them as paperweights and doorstops. I was horrified, but then I realised that it's not the gear, but what you do with the gear that matters. Make the most of what you have and try not to get caught up in megapixels, camera specs and crop factor. The top of the line camera from 3 years ago is considered average today. There will always be bigger and better, but an average photographer will still take average photos on the top of the line camera. And I've seen amazing photography taken with entry-level cameras and even smartphones. So what's my preferred camera and lens combo for portraits and why? I use the Canon 1DX. This is a pro level camera, so it's more expensive and a lot heavier, but it's designed to survive heavy usage. I would say I use this camera for about 80% of my shooting. I also have a Canon 5D Mark III. I'll favour that camera body if I know I have to shoot with a high ISO, that's in very low light, or on a night shoot. At 400 to 1600 ISO, this camera is amazing. But if you don't own a high-end camera, don't worry. Even an entry-level camera today will produce images that still look amazing. I recently tested my son's entry-level DSLR with my Pro body and was blown away by the results. It's not the gear that matters, it's what you do with the gear that counts. The Pro camera I was using 10 years ago now has the same specs as most entry-level cameras. Even if all you have is a smartphone camera, you'll still notice a huge improvement if you just started shooting on that every day. My message is, do what you can with what you have, where you are. Now let's talk about lenses. I love working with a zoom lens when I'm taking portraits because it means I can set up my shot and create full length, 3/4 and tight headshots without having to move my camera. I can stay out of my model's personal space, which can be intimidating or confronting, and keep the momentum of the shoot flowing. The long zoom is also perfect for capturing intimate photos of couples, children, and even pets. I'm often shooting well back at 200mm, and this makes it much easier for my model to forget I'm even taking their picture. I love to work with a focal length of between 100mm to 200mm. A longer focal length compresses images so facial features look flatter and slightly wider, which makes most people look better than they do in real life. A focal length of 24mm to 50mm tends to distort facial features. Faces appear narrower and facial features like the nose look more prominent. So I try and avoid using this lens because I find it makes people look less attractive than they really are. In this series of shots I took of model Jocelyn in Hawaii, you can see that at a focal length of 200mm, she looks gorgeous and it looks really flattering. Her features look beautiful and the background is compressed. As I start to shoot wider and wider, you can see that her face is starting to distort. A 50mm lens is the most realistic focal length. This is what you look like when Jan at the passport office takes your headshot. Shooting a close-up headshot at 24mm really exaggerates Jocelyn's features and she starts to look cartoon-like. Working this close and filling the frame, I think she looks best at a focal length of around 70 to 200mm. I will use a focal length of 24 to 50 for environmental portraits because the wider focal plane shows more of the background in the shot. I used a focal plane of 24mm when I was shooting this series of character portraits in Cuba recently. The locations were so incredible that I wanted to include as much of the detail as possible, so the wider focal length was perfect for capturing the faded beauty of the old theatre I photographed the ballerina in, and the grungy outdoor old school boxing ring I photographed the trainer in. The further away from your model you shoot, the less lens distortion you will have in your shots. So I recommend you use a longer focal length for close-up portraits and a wider focal length when doing full-length shots, unless you're really into that caricature kind of look. I also shot this portrait of a Melbourne dancer at a wider focal length because I wanted to show off the incredible background. The wider focal length exaggerates the distance between the dancer and the Ferris wheel, giving the illusion that he is higher in the sky than he really was. So my go-to lenses of choice are, I work with the Canon 70-200 IS f2.8 L series. It's my workhorse and I use it for about 70 to 80% of my shoots. An average shoot for me will consist of approximately 2,000 to 4,000 frames over the course of a day, and I can't think of another lens in my kit that would give me the consistency, ease, speed and high standard of the 70-200. And the 85 1.2 lens, which is the lens I would marry if I could. The extra shallow depth of field gives gorgeous, dreamy, blurry backgrounds, but it's really slow to focus, and that can be problematic if I'm ever trying to shoot in a hurry. So I try and save it for special occasions and shoots where I have plenty of time on my hands. This promo image of Lockie Hume for the Australian miniseries Beaconsfield was taken using the 85mm 1.2 lens. It was shot using daylight in a dark warehouse. I love this shot so much because it was created with really low light in a location that was really ugly. This lens creates something amazing even when you are given very few options to work with. I love how this lens creates dreamy, beautiful, out of focus backgrounds when shot at wider apertures. It means I can work in most locations with minimal daylight and get really beautiful results, like this image of Australian actor Jared DeParis, photographed in a mechanic's garage in Melbourne. The main light for this shot was coming from a skylight above. That's what I love about this lens. It lets you create something beautiful from nothing. I love this lens so much.